Well, thanks for being with us again on Rockin' Retirement. And today's main topic is going to be about mastering retirement cash flow. We really want to understand the income side of the equation on today's show. So what we're going to do is really look at why it's crucial to analyze your income. We're going to look at kind of uncovering some of the, I guess, the misconceptions, maybe the secrets, if you want to call it that way, of guaranteed income, how that differs from maybe uncertain income, and hopefully shed a little bit of light on what it means to plan with a secure income plan in place and a secure understanding of that income, and then where all the pitfalls lie if you don't have a clear picture of all of this going into retirement. So, Janine, to help us dive into this topic a little bit, why is this such an important topic when it comes to financial stability? What happens if we don't have that clear picture of our retirement income when we get into retirement?
Well, most people have difficulty understanding how they're going to take an income because they're so used to being in accumulation mode. So you're climbing the mountain and you've had a steady paycheck or paychecks for 40 years, 45 years. So how do you take what you've saved and translate that into income? That's usually the biggest challenge for people because depending on how you've allocated your resources, what do you take and when? How much can you take without worry of running out? What happens if you have a year like we did in 22, where the market tanked pretty severely? And if you're not allocated properly, you went with the market. So you've depleted from that top number. And now I've got to try to create an income out of that. So a lot of folks have trouble putting it all together. Now, engineers are great because they've always got spreadsheets. And so it's then a matter of showing folks, okay, let's look at where all your incomes is. And then the biggest challenge is getting people to sit down and go, okay, what's the cost to live? And what are the changes or what do I want to accomplish as I'm retiring or if I'm in retirement or if I'm going to move to another state because now your state income tax could be different or the other types of taxes in that state. How does that affect your cash flow? And most people have problems putting that all together. So one of the things we do is, okay, let's make a list of all your assets. How are they allocated? Where are they located? So we go through all your different qualified plans, 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, Roths, et cetera. Do you have any annuities? If you do, where is it? What do you have you saved outside of those plans? What's your house worth? What's your Social Security? Do you have a pension? A lot of people don't have pensions these days.
Yeah.
So you're basically taking into account all these different buckets, if you will, and then categorizing them by what type of bucket are they? Are they, tax-free or deferred tax or tax now or, how does this all work? And then depending on what you're trying to replace, are you trying to replace the income you have or had? Can you do that? With what you've saved, can you do that? Because I've had instances or conversations where people make this much, way out here.
Sure.
They save this much and they think they're going to get this much in retirement.
Do you really try to get people to focus on like one source of income, one or two, and just really lean heavily into those? Or is this one of those cases where you don't want all those eggs in one basket, so you want a nice diversity of income coming from all over the place? Or does it even matter?
Well, I think sometimes it does matter because a lot of times people become very risky, they become risk averse going into retirement because, and I tell a lot of people that if you're 60, and let's just use that as because it's a nice round number, if you're 60 and you're healthy and you're married, the statistics show that there's a 50% likelihood one of you is living to 92. If you're happily married, there's a statistical probability both of you are going to live into your 80s, late 80s. So you're talking potentially 30 years, if not longer. So how do you make the money last? So where is it? What is your guaranteed base of income? Well, for most people, that's Social Security. So what does Social Security look like? When should you take it? What makes sense? What happens if one of you passes early? What happens if a divorce happens? Because I've had that happen with clients where divorced at 30 years. One is divorced at 40 years, which was a shocker.
Yeah.
That changes the entire plan. altogether, almost as much as if somebody had passed away, almost. But it really does change how you're going to think about your assets going forward. So again, trying to figure out what your base spending rate is and what are the things that you're spending on. What do you need to have for that? And then how do you use the assets for discretionary? Like a lot of people want to travel. Do I have enough money to do that? Most people have that, depending on the type of trip and where you're going. Most people are not going to spend $14,000 on a vacation. They might spend $5,000. So it's having those kinds of conversations. What are you trying to accomplish? And then part of that is, do I spend it all because you've earned it all? Do I spend it all on me and us?
Yeah.
Or do I make sure I leave some for legacy? So you're kind of playing with that cash flow of, okay, now grandkids come along and I want to save money for my grandkids, or I want to do this for my grandkids. What should that look like?
I can see how if you go into retirement without a clear plan, you just end up chasing your tail, right? Okay, we're going to give this much to the kids. Oh, grandkids came along. We need a little bit more to go travel to see them a little bit more often, or to get them gifts, or you know what, we want to help them with college a little bit. So then you start shifting your priorities, changing money over, and you can kind of just see how if you don't have a great plan in place, you're going to be all over the place.
Well, and it's really difficult if you be, well, I shouldn't say it's difficult. It can be a little more challenging if you're reactionary. Or if you have one child is thriving, the other one not so much, or, depending on how many kids you have, somebody's going to need help at some point in time. So how do you do that without alienating the other kids? Or how do you do that, equal is not fair and fair is not equal. I tell people that all the time, because people are at different stages at different times. So, how do you work that into cash flow? It's figuring out where's my base need, and then what can I spend in addition to that without having to worry about depleting the portfolio or running out of money before you run out of life. That's a very important consideration, and then actually it's probably one of the biggest fears for retirees, especially for those over 70.
I hear a lot about guaranteed income from other advisors, and then I hear other financial advisors never mention guaranteed income. So obviously there's two categories there, guaranteed versus non-guaranteed income sources. So how do you balance it with your clients? Is there a proper way to have a little bit of both, or where does the focus typically go?
Well, it comes down, guaranteed, generally people would consider a pension or Social Security to be guaranteed. Now, depending on what the government does with Social Security, I think it's going to be there. For many people, pensions can be an issue if the company becomes insolvent, if it's a company pension, or if even the state. Several states may have difficulty in the future paying out some of these pensions, so that could be a problem. But in general, a pension or Social Security income is going to be guaranteed. If you wanted to take some of your assets and make them guaranteed, well, that would be an annuity, because Social Security is an annuity. So is a pension. It's just a consistent stream of income over a length of time. So if you do that, then the question is, what type of annuity should you have? Because the type of annuity will depend on the goal. And I think too often people are sold a product without really understanding how it should be used in their plan. So yes, you can create guarantees of income. The other thing is, are you going to use part of your assets? Are you going to self-insure, if you will, for some kind of care down the road, like long-term care? What does that look like? That's a whole conversation in itself. So do you carve out some of your assets to guarantee that money's going to be there? And so it all comes down to, what do you have? What are you using it for? What's it for what's the purpose for the money long term? And then can I create a base, and then I don't have to worry about paying what I need to pay, for all my fixed expenses. And then everything else would be discretionary, which non-guaranteed is going to be market-based.
Okay.
So,
is that how you typically match things up? You would, if you're creating some guaranteed income, that's really what you're then allocating to take care of those those must-haves, or
Right.
we need to treat this like the paycheck, get the bills paid, and we're going to use the guaranteed money for that. And then the visiting the grandkids, the going on trips each year, all those kinds of items, that's a little bit more where it might be coming from non-guaranteed sources. It doesn't have to be exactly that way, it sounds like, but that's kind of mentally how often
Right.
it gets pitched
Yeah,
or
it
understood.
is. And then, the allocation of the portfolios, the money that you've saved or have invested, that needs to be done correctly. So it'll be there, because you've got to mitigate. There are ways to mitigate risks with investment portfolios so that you're not going to be taking more risk than you really can stomach. And so that's a conversation also in itself, because you have to understand what some of the science is. No, you don't have to go into super detail and read pages of boring information. There actually is pretty commonly used now research and science to build portfolios. It's making sure that you've got the proper amount of diversification and the allocation between stocks, bonds, and whatever else assets, so that the money, you're not going to run out of money. That's
key.
the biggest. Yeah, that is the biggest fear, is people running out of money.
So everybody wants to maximize their opportunities, right? So are the strategies for maximizing guaranteed income different from maximizing non-guaranteed income?
They can be. If somebody's much more risk averse and doesn't want a lot of money in the market, there's a trade-off. There's always a trade-off. If you want guarantees, you're going to get less interest or less return, because you can't. It's very difficult to have both. Now there are some annuities out there now, MIGAs. They're not in the market. They're pegged to the market, and you will get growth with no downside. And some of them come without surrender charges and a few other things. So I'm liking those as alternatives, as a partial alternative to market base. They work for people, depending on the age and what you're trying to do. And then if you're taking income. But a lot of people forget, with qualified money, IRAs, et cetera, that you're going to have RMDs, and the RMDs have been moved back. If you haven't taken your required minimum distributions, that deadline has been moved back. So it's 73 for this year. It's 75 going forward. So there's a lot more wiggle room.
Yeah. I think it was 70 and a half when you started your first podcast a couple of years ago. So it just keeps increasing at this point.
Yeah. Well, that's the Secure Act putting that in motion, which is really interesting, because at the same time, Congress is squeezing any beneficiaries to this money, because if it's qualified money, which is where most of the money is in IRAs and 401ks, et cetera. So they're saying, okay, you don't need to take it till later, but then if your beneficiaries inherit this money and they're non-spousal beneficiaries, there's a squeeze in terms of how quickly they have to take that money out, which means more taxes.
Yep. Tax is always part of the equation, always part of the conversation, for sure.
Yeah.
And that would be another part of the cash flow conversation, but we'll limit it today to just analyzing this income side of things. And that's a great breakdown, Janine. Appreciate you walking us through all of that. Anything else we should know just about that income equation as we get ready for retirement? Any final thoughts on that part of the program?
Well, I think people do need to, like you just mentioned, you do need to keep in mind the tax picture. The overall tax picture, because some people will say, oh, I don't want to pay any taxes. I go, well, guess what? Nobody gets out of paying taxes.
That's right.
It's pay me now, pay me later. We can minimize taxes through asset location, but that's important. But a lot of people, I actually had somebody who was complaining about taxes, and I don't get these very often, but I looked at her and I said, you don't really have a tax problem. And then I go through the tax brackets and codes, and like, you don't really have a tax problem because of the way you've set things up. So, but yeah, it's really important that people kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah.
in addition to all the other things, which is why you need somebody will sit down and help you understand what's really going on.
Well, if you've never walked through your income and done a true analysis on it and looked at your retirement cash flow problem and solved those math equations, making sure all of this is addressed, pick up the phone, give Janine a call, and you can walk through that together. 443-718-6311 is the direct line to Janine, or you can go to theuswealthadvisors.com. We'll put the contact information in the description of today's show, so be sure to check that out.